Tor Ekhoff, better known as Apitor, had faced his fair share of hardship. With the troubled past and, later, the grim reality of a cancer diagnosis, he made a promise to himself to live life to its absolute fullest. Now, for him, that meant skating across frozen lakes in little more than his underwear, all while downing an entire bottle of vodka as if it were nothing more than water. To most of us, it might look like a reckless dare or the work of an unhinged person, but for this Norwegian man, it was therapy, kind of like a bizarre ritual that helped him cope in the darkest of moments. Whether by coincidence or science or sheer resilience, Apitor would not only outlive his diagnosis, but would even build a massive following in the process, and from that point onward, he swore to keep pushing life to its limits. However, tragically, little did he know that the very thing that gave him strength and would help him rise to fame would also one day become his downfall. Welcome back to Coffeehouse Crime, folks. My name is Adrian, and today we're exploring the story of Apitor, the YouTuber who seemed to have ice water coursing through his veins. From a quiet Norwegian childhood to worldwide internet fame, Tor's journey was nothing short of remarkable, though sadly, it ended with a bittersweet final chapter. Now for me, this video is as much a tribute as it is a story, because on the weekends my friends and I would often watch Apitor's videos, usually with a drink or two in hand. And while we may have always laughed at his ridiculous behaviour, I never truly appreciated how extraordinary his life was until now. Oh, and by the way, please stick around to the end of the video for an announcement. Anyway, with all of that out the way, please grab yourself a coffee, subscribe if you haven't yet, get comfortable, and come along with me as we celebrate life and the life of Tor Ekhoff. This is the case of Apitor. Hello folks, og velkommen til Norge. Of course, I'm talking about Norway, the land of fjords, trolls, and people who would likely laugh at your definition of cold. Honestly, it's a place that looks so stunning it looks photoshopped, with towering cliffs, icy waterfalls, and lakes so clear that they make your tap water look like swamp juice. Sounds delightful, right? But don't get too cocky about visiting this place, because Norwegians will probably expect you to hike up a mountain at 5 AM with nothing more than a backpack filled with brown cheese sandwiches. The only exception here is that Tor would have likely expected you to bring a bottle of vodka too. Culturally, Norway is hilarious in its contradictions. For example, they are one of the richest nations on earth, but for some reason, they will also happily eat frozen pizza like it's some sort of gourmet cuisine. Oh, and there's also the fact that their national obsession seems to be cross-country skiing, which is basically jogging but with sticks and less dignity.
Feels like I'm wearing nothing at all. Nothing at all. Nothing at all.
But in all seriousness, here is the real truth. If you can handle the 5 AM hikes, frozen pizza, and skin-tight joggers, then the rest of Norway is absolutely magical. It will humble you with beauty, freeze you into humility, and remind you that life is better with mountains, vodka, and maybe a slightly terrifying troll staring at you from the souvenir shelf. And it was here in this amazing country that Tor grew up. Born on November the 22nd, 1964, Tor Ekhoff lived in Kristiansund, which can be found on the western coast of Norway. It's a place where the ocean bites, and the wind seems to teach you some form of manners. So, it wasn't just that he was used to the bitter cold. He was born in it. As the second of 3 brothers, Tor grew up as a middle child. He liked to climb rocks, splash into cold water, and generally treat hypothermia more like a suggestion rather than a diagnosis. At the age of 6, the family moved to Sandefjord, a place that is filled with forests and, of course, fjords. Educationally, Tor studied history, philosophy, and Nordic literature at the University of Bergen. It was in the year 1993 that he graduated with what basically translates to a Master of the Arts degree, and it was during this time that he also met the love of his life, Tove Skjøven. In fact, later that year, they would welcome their son Johannes to the world. So, in 1 year alone, he graduated, met his soulmate, and even became a dad. Good going, Tor. That is quite the trilogy there. Life, however, was not all perfect. Sadly, Tor lost his mother the following year in 1994, and his father followed 14 years later in 2008. 2 heavy blows that he carried with him quietly but deeply. And as it turns out, he was wrestling with his own demons too, because the routines of city life had begun to grind him down quite heavily. The noise and the repetition and the sense of being so disconnected from nature really started to wear away. Over time, Tor grew even more restless and irritable, and he knew that if he were to stay on this path, it would drive him insane. And so, in the shadow of his father's death, he made one really big decision. He decided that he would leave the city behind and retreat to the countryside. Which is great, but he also had a family to think about here, which is why the decision was so difficult to make. With that said, his wife and child decided to stay put in the city, but despite now living apart, the relationship continued from a distance. But deep down, Tor knew in his heart that he had to go, and so he adopted this new solitary lifestyle. He still supported his family, by the way, but like I said, it was now just more from a distance, and he kept his job at the local paint factory to make sure that money was still rolling in. Moving into his new life, he spent his days camping, hiking Jotunheimen, and, of course, taking hundreds of unnecessary dives into glacial water. It was somewhere between the bonfires, ice baths, and belly flops that Tor grew fascinated by evolutionary biology, particularly with how close we are to apes. In fact, did you know that his future YouTube nickname Apitor would actually come from this fascination? Apparently, friends swore you could see it in him too, in the way that his face would light up right before diving into another ridiculous lake. Now, at the end of the day, we are all just human and have our own battles to deal with. And privately, Tor battled with a painful condition called ulcerative colitis. Not only did this drain him physically, but out of embarrassment, he kept it hidden from most of his friends and family. Publicly though, he openly wrestled with the ice. And that's because no illness could stop him from plunging into freezing water or chasing the raw and simple thrill of being alive. By the mid-2000s, Tor had a unique life that was filled with both joy and hardship. I suppose that's all part of being human again, right? But saying that, Tor had many quirks that made his life just purely fascinating. And although he didn't quite know it yet, but a little thing called YouTube was ready to put all of that grief, grit, and goof in front of an international audience. In October of 2006, and at the age of nearly 42 years old, Tor did something that most men his age wouldn't even think of. He created a YouTube channel, naming it Apitor. His very first upload, which was titled In My Boat, was exactly how most channels begin, just a homemade video of Tor in his usual habitat. The video was short. There were no theatrics, no vodka, and no thin ice. It was just a glimpse of someone who would soon become an internet legend. And by the way, even back then, you could still catch a glimpse of the many facial expressions that he would make over the next decade.
I was reading an article about YouTube in 2006. YouTube was at that time 1 year old, and I just decided to make a channel. I had no plans, nothing. I just did it for fun.
For years, his uploads would slowly trickle in, which included camping trips, fishing, and fierce Norwegian winters. It's funny, but even back then, you could tell that Tor adored the ice. As the confidence in him slowly grew, the silent comedian in him gradually emerged. And although he rarely spoke, of course apart from the occasional mutter or his trademark eep eep, words were never really needed for this sort of content. Even now, the sight of him just makes me laugh and shake my head. Honestly, this guy is such a character. Anyway, his breakthrough would finally come in the year 2011 with a video that was named On Thin Sea Ice 2. That felt really weird saying, On Thin Sea Ice 2. Is that 5 words or just 1? The video involved Tor skating on cracking ice, plunging through holes in the sea, and swigging vodka, all while grunting like a seal. The video was reckless, absurd, silly, and also impossible not to watch. In just over a week, the video had gained more than 1 million views, and all of a sudden, blogs, forums, and other YouTubers were all talking about this crazy Norwegian. So, of course, from that moment onwards, Tor decided to double down into his niche, that being vodka, eep eep, and chainsaws on ice skates. And within only a couple of years after that, he went from friendly lunatic lunatic to legendary friendly lunatic. So, by the late 2010s, Tor was still living this strange double life that many of us YouTubers face when we haven't quite made the jump yet from our old jobs to full-time content creation. Personally, I know this feeling very well because I actually worked as an engineer for 3 years after Coffeehouse crime took off. And by the way, do you know how weird it was to be doing that? I remember being on this supplier visit with a few colleagues when, all of a sudden, the company's manager asks me, "So, how did you go from industrial gas turbines to body bags?" And well, that felt kind of awkward to say the least. Actually, now that I think about it, probably even more so for him because his two lives were so completely different. You see, on weekdays, he was this quiet, shy and mild-mannered factory worker, but on the weekends, well, he was the internet's favourite goofball. But a much harsher challenge was just around the corner because in early 2018, he was diagnosed with rectal cancer. And for a man who laughed in the face of hypothermia, this was a sobering reminder of his own mortality. The diagnosis came at the age of 53, which actually is quite young for this kind of condition. And already burdened by ulcerative colitis, cancer was a cruel double blow. While privately he and his family wrestled with fear, publicly nothing seemed to change. And if there was one thing about Tor, it's that he never backed away from a fight. He met the diagnosis with stubbornness, and perhaps a shot of vodka for courage too. Later that year, surgeons removed the cancerous part of his body. The operation was serious, and would leave Tor with an ostomy bag for the rest of his life. For someone who liked to live half naked in freezing lakes, this could have been devastating. But Tor was Tor, and he wasn't going to let anything change him. When he eventually told his viewers about his diagnosis, he did it with candor and even humor. There was no self-pity or even dramatics in this video, just a quick message to say that he was still thriving regardless. In fact, cancer did not seem to even dim Tor's spirit. If anything, it sparked it. The brush with mortality reminded him why he'd been diving into ice in the first place. To feel alive, and to celebrate it. It is very common for survivors to talk about a new appreciation for life and its small joys. And Tor was no different. But where most people would honor that through tropical holidays and newfound hobbies, his version of joy involved more frozen lakes, vodka, and chainsaws. Throughout his treatment in the year 2018, Tor's uploads slowed down for a short while. Now, of course, this worried his followers. But when Tor spoke up about it, he seemed as happy as usual, sharing his diagnosis without self-pity, and even thanking supporters for the flood of encouragement. The positivity that Tor had been giving to the world was now coming back to him tenfold. And the experience of going through cancer gave all of his stunts an added weight too, because each time that he jumped back into the ice with that cheeky glint in his eye wasn't just comedy anymore. It was proof that not only was he still alive, but he was laughing and happy too. By late 2018, and now finally cancer-free, Tor was back with more energy than ever. He didn't seem to dwell on the illness at all, nor did he make it part of his brand either. Instead, he simply returned to what he loved. Now, from a personal perspective, it was around this time that I actually found him on YouTube, and I remember thinking the same thing every time I watched him. That life is short, so why waste it? Shortly after, his channel surged. Old fans celebrated his comeback, while new ones, like myself, discovered this Norwegian who treated hypothermia like a hobby. Some of his uploads were now reaching tens of millions of views, with his most successful video, named The First Snow 4, now sitting at 105 million. It wasn't a long one, it was just Tor doing what he usually does. Of course, that being speedos, boots, snow angels, bear hugs with icy trees, and plunging into a frozen bathtub with vodka in hand. Mainstream media would soon catch on too. At home, Norwegians laughed, while abroad, shows like Australia's Sunrise featured his videos to sun-soaked Aussies, dubbing him one of Norway's most fearless men in the process. Throughout all of this, Tor remained humble. No inflated ego, no self-infatuation, and no repetitive selfies on Instagram. He reminded everyone that this wasn't for fame or money, he was just having fun. And it felt like the world decided to have fun with him too.
Did you expect to get a lot of attention off of YouTube?
When I started, as I said, I had no, I didn't think about that at all.
You might be surprised to learn this, but the crazy thing is that he never actually quit his day job. Despite having over 1 million subscribers, he still kept on clocking in to the paint factory. And although his golden play button was nice, it didn't really matter to him. By 2020, Apitor had gone global. He was big in Europe, North America, Asia, and thanks to his vodka, was absolutely adored in Poland. Comments, memes, and even fan art of him poured in, and Tor would always respond with gratitude and, the important part, without much of an ego. By now, he had built several traditions into his videos, including the annual First Snow, New Year's dives, and his own birthday videos, which, sadly, will soon become a very important part to this story. Between all of his antics, he would also capture Norway's stunning landscapes and offer a glimpse of fjords and forests, usually alongside his half-naked body. With his career now at full throttle, the media gave Apitor all sorts of nicknames, like the Norwegian Daredevil, King of Cold Water, and even a White Walker from Game of Thrones. And one article even joked that he'd drank more booze on camera than the entire cast of Mad Men. And online, his channel carried an oddly wholesome tone too. There was no malice or negativity or bullying going on, he was just a man refusing to grow up, on ice, and with a lot of vodka. By 2021, his channel boasted more than 1.2 million subscribers and more than 400 million views. And all of this began with one simple boat video. Now, he was known all over the world. He really must have felt unstoppable at this stage too, because not only had he beat cancer and was now doing all of these insane stunts all over the place, but he was becoming famous for it too. But sadly, just as Apitor was reaching newfound heights, fate was preparing one final tragic twist. When the pandemic hit in the year 2020, his videos hit people in a whole new way. They escaped their lockdowns and rubbish politics by watching his videos instead. And although he was now in his mid-50s, he seemed to age with grace. And of course, still acted like a kid at heart too. However, life was not without sorrow either, because in October of 2021, his older brother Ulf would sadly lose his own battle with cancer. The loss was an absolutely devastating blow for Tor. Together, they had fought their illnesses at the same time, and although Tor made it, he was the only one to survive. In late 2021, his channel was still thriving. By now, his fans would always wait for his birthday tradition, where he would create a video and title it, "I'm not dead, I am X today," with of course X being how many times he'd made it around the sun. It was kind of like a victory lap in a way, and low-key a way to say that he had once again beat cancer and all of his dangerous stunts. On November the 22nd, 2021, Tor finally turned 57. And just like clockwork, he once again marked the occasion in a video titled, "I am not dead, I am 57. However, this time, those words would carry unintended weight. Looking back, the title feels chilling, almost like fate was being tempted in that moment. However, it was just Apitor being Apitor. Cheeky, defiant, and wholesome. In this video, he took an ice bath in a battered old tub. And side note, but that water looks so grim. Wearing nothing but shorts, he then jumped out, raised his vodka bottle, and took another swig. He then grabbed his shirt and jacket, took another swig, kissed a tree, and went for a walk around the forest. But of course, not without his usual humor first. He then found his old hat, wrote his new age on it, and aura farmed for a while. This was typical Apitor. doing the kind of shit that only our intrusive thoughts can dream of. And before we knew it, he was then back in the bathtub, licking ice and smashing it over his head. This video went down exactly as you'd expect. Viewers found it hilarious and celebrated his age at the same time. By now, the running gag was that he was indestructible. I mean, what could possibly stop a man who swam in ice, laughed at the cold, and had already beaten cancer? No one could have ever imagined that this would be Apitor's final video, because tragically, what followed only a few days later would turn that light-hearted celebration into a moment of haunting irony. Only 4 days later, and on November the 26th, Tor headed out to Jacob's Dam, which can be found near Kongsberg. It was a Friday, and for him, just an ordinary outing. The weather was crisp, the ice was finally solid, and he was eager to capture more footage. He even sent selfies to his partner Tove, smiling by the water and reporting to her that the conditions were perfect for skating. It was clear that Apitor was once again in his element, alone and with his camera and tripod. The plan was simple. He was once again going to film himself skating while taking a dip, which was going to be used as material for his next episode on his Thin Ice series. Now, obviously, Tor had fallen through ice countless times before. I mean, it was quite literally the entire point. However, today, something was to go terribly wrong. Just a bit of background information, but Kongsberg is a beautiful part of Norway, known for its mild summers and its chilly winters. The weather here will usually stay above 0 degrees for most of the year, typically dipping to below freezing at the end of November, which is precisely what Tor had hoped for when making his journey to Jacob's Dam. But the thing is, the weather was a little milder than usual this year, meaning that the lake hadn't quite frozen over just as much as usual yet. But when Tor arrived on November the 26th, the weather for that day was actually colder than usual, dropping to -5 degrees Celsius, which was about 3 to 4 degrees colder than most of the days before. Now, what this means is that the temperatures might have actually fooled him that day. Doing this for many years prior, he could typically make a good judgment on where he can skate versus where he shouldn't. It is likely that the weather that day would have given him a false sense of security because the ice wouldn't have thickened so much in the days prior. After removing most of his clothes and putting on his ice skates, Tor then ventured out into the lake, ready to grab some of his usual footage. And sadly, that is when disaster struck. A few minutes in, Tor ventured onto a section of ice that simply could not hold his weight. The ice then suddenly cracked beneath him, therefore plunging Tor into the freezing water below. Normally, this would have just been usual routine for him, but this time, whether from bad luck or the ice simply breaking each time he tried to get out, he couldn't get a grip. The ice was probably so thin that he could not leverage himself out of the water from it, and with the water being so brutally cold, it likely numbed his body and his strength within seconds. With everything he had, Tor tried to climb out, but with the brittle ice around the hole crumbling beneath his hands, he unfortunately was out of luck. Alone on the lake, he must have realized that he was in real deep trouble here. Although only a few minutes had passed, thankfully, a random person soon passed by and raised the alarm. With Tor still alive, rescue crews rushed to the scene to help him, where firefighters and divers managed to haul him out of the water before then taking him to hospital. However, sadly, he had been submerged in the water for far too long. Doctors worked tirelessly to revive him, warming his body and restarting his heart in the hopes that he would live. But tragically, nothing they did could bring him back out of his unconsciousness, and on November the 27th, with his partner and their son by his side, Tor was pronounced dead. Now, people were devastated by the news, but understandably, what shocked people the most is the cruel irony of his most recent video. The news spread rather quickly too, with headlines around the world highlighting the horrific coincidence. In fact, some even believed that it must have been a hoax. But as Norwegian outlets confirmed the story and Tove shared her heartbreaking post online, the reality finally began to sink in. And his audience, well, they quite simply couldn't believe it. And the outpouring of grief was absolutely enormous. I remember when this happened actually, because at the time I was researching the case of Snow the Salt Queen when all of a sudden one of my friends on Discord messaged me to say, "Hey, have you heard the news about Apitor?" There was actually a lot of confusion at first because you know how it goes. Sometimes there's just this one rogue article and then it all spreads like wildfire. but eventually we did learn that it was in fact true. The dark irony, of course, is that Tor's final upload to YouTube was all about celebrating life, a routine birthday ritual declaring that he was far from dead. And for this to be filmed only days before his passing, well, it's a reminder to all of us how quickly life can change, for better or for worse. What was initially meant to be just another cheeky tradition has unfortunately since become a digital gravestone, one that now sits at over 8 million views at the time of making this video. If you go and open that video today, you'll find more than 57,000 comments. And not the usual mix of jokes and eep-eeps, but a flood of mourning, gratitude, and heartfelt farewells. If you were to ask me what I think about Tor, I don't think he was just merely a YouTuber. To his audience, he became something far more special than that. He was the internet's eccentric uncle, and the kind of figure who could brighten up anyone's day, usually accompanied by a grin, a ridiculous plunge into icy water, and, of course, a chainsaw or two. And through his videos, you can see that followers, friends, and strangers alike all echoed the same sentiment. That Tor had made life a little bit brighter, simply by being his fearless, unfiltered, authentic self. And that, I think, is where the story of Apitor carries its greatest weight, because beneath all of the humour and absurdity of this man lies one profound yet simple reminder that life is finite, fragile, and never guaranteed, so we'd better live it while we can. In a world where we are filled with so much uncertainty, division, and vitriol, we are all likely seeking what Tor had already found: authenticity and the happiness that can be discovered in all of the small things in life. Even now, Apitor's channel still remains open, and people drop by to laugh again or even discover him for the first time. And although his life may have been cut short at only 57 years old, those years were lived with an intensity and authenticity that many of us will never achieve. One of the final things to note here is that Tor wasn't rich, wasn't chasing fame, and certainly wasn't conventional. However, he was free, and in that freedom, he found happiness. Watching Apitor skate across a frozen lake with a vodka in hand might seem a little ridiculous at first, but for many people, it meant something far greater. It was a reminder to stop taking life so seriously, to find the joy hidden under discomfort, and to celebrate the very fact that we are alive. In that sense, Apitor left us not only with funny videos, but a philosophy: to be authentic to yourself and to dive headfirst. Maybe not into an icy lake, but at least into the unknown. And I think I'll end this video here on his teachings, because really there is no better way. But what are your thoughts on this case? As always, please share your thoughts in the comments down below. I know this story was a little different to the usual, but hey, I really wanted to talk about Apitor. Before I end this video, I just wanted to share a quick announcement with you all, but you can now find Coffeehouse Crime over on Spotify. They reached out to me directly about 2 months ago, and now I've started my own video podcast over there. These are the same videos that you'll find right here on YouTube, by the way, so there's no need to switch over if you don't want to. I just wanted to bring in new ways for people to find my episodes. Also, I didn't really want to split all of my content over various names either, as that just doesn't really make sense to me, so you'll find all of my content under the same roof. Unless, of course, I change to a new type of genre, and then I'll probably add a second channel, but for now, it's all just Coffeehouse Crime. However, to celebrate, I have actually made one podcast exclusive episode over on Spotify, where I revisit the very first case that I covered, that being the story of Joshua Maddox. So I'll leave a link down below, and I'd love for you to go watch it and maybe leave a rating if you can. But honestly, feel free to watch me wherever you prefer, because I'm staying right here on YouTube. As mentioned, there are no changes here to YouTube, and all of my episodes will still find their way right here to this channel. This is just another way for you to try and find me. If you couldn't tell already, I feel sick as a dog today, so apologies if I sounded a little bit flat here, but I really do appreciate you sticking around. Anyway folks, thank you so much for watching today, and as always, I'll see you again very shortly for another one. Until that moment arrives though, remember to look after yourselves and each other. And of course, stay safe and stay curious. Thank you, and goodbye.